So anyway, since you guys are here, let's just get started and see if we can finish working on this app tonight, right? So what we did last week was we created our task model, right? Our task model, which is the model for our to-do app, right? Then we went forward to create a pop-up for our users, right? A pop-up so that if they click this, they can type whatever they want, right? And we also got whatever value they are typing, right? The value of whatever text or whatever to do they are typing. We also have it, and we are just outputting this to see how it gets the value as it changes, right? Then we also have unsubmitted, so that if they press enter, we can now clear that particular pop-up. We can dismiss the alert dialog. We are not done with this, right? Then we went to our task widget. So we have this future builder. So I told you guys to read on future builder, right? It just basically returns it's a widget that returns a future, right? Or constructs a future. So what it does is, depending on what future you pass here, is able to construct a widget based on that. So we're now saying if the snapshot has any data, that means if there's a data saved within our database, if we're able to receive any piece of data, right, then we now get that snapshot and add it to our box. Then we return a view. So this is the widget our future is going to return when there is data, right? Then we say else, if there's no data, return this circular dialog, this circular progress indicator. So that's why we have this here running. So we've worked on this and we've worked on this now. So among the two key things we are going to work on, one is finishing adding the save logic to this, right? So that we can save the content to our database. That's one. Then we have to now add a list. So instead of returning this center now, this empty center, if there's data, right, we now have to return our list of to-dos, right? So let's just work on this alert dialog and see where we are. So on submitted, we have a value, right? So we're saying set state and pop. So what we want to do here now is we want to add that particular value to our database, right? So what we're going to do is, let me just do this to say if let me see if I've created okay, we have a variable, right? So our text now is saved as content. So if content is not equal to null, so we can now create a new task, a new variable task. Say is equal to our task object now, or our task model. So our task model expects you to pass a to-do, a timestamp, right? So our to-do now in this case is the particular content, right? So content, trying to see to make sure, okay, to make sure that saying that this is not null. So our date and time now, we're just going to use this date time dot now. So this is going to just take the current time where we are creating this to do. And whenever you create a to do in the beginning, it's going to be false, right? So we now have this particular object to do, which takes in the content, whatever the user types, and the current date time when it's created, and we have our done state. So remember, the representation of our database now is this box, right? If you remember from the last time, is this box. So we now have to insert that now into our box. So for us to do that, we are going to say box. So now add, right? So when you are adding this value, remember, Hive itself is a what do you call it? It's a NoSQL database system, right? That takes a key value pair. So that's why we now have to convert whatever were these objects now, right? We now have to convert it into a map. So that's why we created this particular helper method here. So so here now we can now say task dot to map. So this is just warning us that box itself can be null. So we can now confirm that we know that this is not going to be null, right? So let me have this. So once we do that, we can now set state. We can now set state and pop the dialog box, and we've inserted the item into our database, right? So remember to just insert. First of all, we have to make sure that our content is not null. Then once the content is not null, we create an object of the task we are trying to store into the database. We call the instance of box and use the add function to add the item into the box. So similarly, if you do this, you can see all the methods you can use, right? You can say clear, close, add all if you have a list, delete all, delete at, and so on. So you can see how straightforward the CRUD process of this thing is, right? So I think with that we are done with I believe we should be done with this. The next thing we have to build now is our list. Remember, we need to have a list within this place with listing all our to-dos, right? So that's what we have to work on next, and I feel like is the major thing that is left right now. So what I'll do is I'll create a widget, and I'll call it let me call it list to do list. Since it's a widget, I have to return a widget, right? And now the widget I'm returning is the list view. List view dot builder, not the list view itself. So the list view dot builder method that I told you guys to read on, right? It's just a widget that helps us create like a collection of list items, right? So it has a property that we can use called we have properties like the item count, item builder, and so on. So the item builder now returns a widget. In this case, we are going to use a widget called a list tile. So each item you see within a list, so if you go to your contacts now, each of those contacts in the list, right, they are called a list. That widget is called a list tile. So that's what we're going to use. So within our builder, we have to create a build context and the index. So for this, we're going to have a build context. Just going to call it context. Then we now have our index. So the index now is what we are going to use to monitor the particular location of an item we are dealing with. So within this, I can now decide to return a list tile, right? So let's hover over this list tile and see what it accepts. It has like a lot of things. It has leading, it has title, it has trailing, and so on, right? So what we are going to use in this case, we're going to use the title and the subtitle. Then we are going to just use these three: title, subtitle, and trailing. So let's just have let's have that first. So we're going to set the title, and our title now is going to be a text. Let me just put this as workout, right? Then we're going to have a subtitle. And I'm just going to put it as date dot now, date time dot now. So we're going to rewrite all these things to string. Sorry, this is supposed to be a text. So we have this text. Then our trailing, in this case, is going to be an icon. Let's say icons dot say checkbox outline blank, because we are assuming that our to-do is currently empty, right? So this is just the skeleton now of our to-do list. So we have a list builder that is going to build a list of items for us, and all our items are going to be represented using this list tile. So we have a title for our to-do, which is, in this case, we're just hard coding workout. We're going to change it to the content now of our to-do. Then we have subtitle, which is date time dot now. Then we have our trailing, which is an icon that shows if the task is completed or not. So now let's add another attribute here that tells the list builder how long the list should be. So we're going to have another property called item count. So this item count now expects you to pass it like the length of the items within the list, right? So for us to get that now, we have to create a list, and our list is going to be all our tasks, and it's going to be what we have within our box. So we are now going to cast that now, convert it to a list. So we're just going to say tasks dot length. So this is going to say, okay, create the number of lists that this list builder should create. The number of list items should be as long as the content within the box, right? So that's basically what this says. I'm trying to just format this. Let me do this. So now we have this. Ideally, our list item will be as long as that. So now, since we have our tasks, right, the list of our tasks, we can get each of the individual item within our list now. So what we can do is we can now convert it back to say var task, or right, then we can say task So I'm going to explain this now. So we have tasks.fromMap, and this is going to be tasks index. So what we are doing is we are pulling each item, right? So from index 0, 1, 2, 3, we are getting them each as a variable, and we are populating them one by one into a list. So if we have the first item now, maybe do Java homework, for example, that will be the first thing. And the next index 1, will be go for a jog. That will be the second thing, right? So that's what we are doing here, and we are achieving that using this from map helper method that we did here, which is this, right? So it's now going to return to us a map, and we can use these keys, right, to access what we want within that map. So let's see what that is like now. So if we want to get our title now, our text, the content, you can just say task.todo. So this is going to give us the task, right, that we passed in, right? Then for our date time, we just basically do the same thing, right? So it's going to give us a date time, so I can say task dot to, I think it's timestamp we use, right? Timestamp dot to string. So basically this is going to get us our to do, and this is going to get us our timestamp. Now for our icon, right, it's not as straightforward as just returning the values, right? What we now have to do is we now have to update our icon based on if the to do is done, completed or not, right? So basically what we're going to do is have a checkbox in the corner, and if the task is done, then that icon now changes. So we're going to use the ternary operator. So if we say task dot done, right, if it's true we return icons dot checkbox outlined, right? So if it's true, we return this checkbox outline, but if it's not true, we now return the original one we had, which is the blank checkbox. So you can see it here. So if it's done, we get this checkbox. Otherwise, if it's not done, we have this here. If you like, you can change the color. You can say colors, green for this, and you can change the other one if you want it to give some other visual aid. If you want to give other visual aid to it, right? So for me, I'm just going to leave it as that. So you can add on tap. So on tap now, when the user taps the to do icon, right, or when the user taps the tile now, that means they are marking them as completed. So that's what we're going to do, and I'm going to say task dot done. So this is going to keep flipping it, right? So if task is done, it's now going to set it as not done, right? Which is false, means the task itself is not done, or it's false. Then we can now update our box. So we can now say box. So now we have these methods, right? Because we're not adding a new item. And if you are familiar with HTTP requests, you have get and you have put, and put is similar to I think patch, which is used to update, right? But in this case, what we are using is we're just going to use put at. So now we are putting at the index, which is the current location of the to do that we are tapping. What are we doing? We are putting task, sorry, let me get rid of this value, task dot to map, right? Then we can now set state to update. In this case, we're not passing anything through the set state. Let me do one last thing before I allow you guys ask your questions. So we're going to have on long press, and for on long press, what we want to do is we want to delete the item. So you can see box. So in this case, we're going to use delete at. I'm going to delete at the current index of the tile that you held or you are pressing on for long, right? Then we can also set state. Sorry, let me make this a single line and this a single line. So let me hear your questions before, if there are any questions. If you have any, typically if you have any questions, don't wait for me to ask. You can just raise your hand in the chat, and then I'll allow you guys ask your questions. So any question before we proceed? Yes, please.
Okay, sir, for the checkbox, so is there a way to add like a pop-up to verify that you actually done the act, or it's that particular listing you put? Maybe because you can mistakenly tap on it, but is there like a way to add a pop-up to, like, are you sure?
Yeah, like to validate, right? Yes, you can do that, right? So basically similar to what we have here, right? What we have here with this show dialog. So you can show a dialog, you can create another show dialog to confirm, and if they confirm, right, then in that case you can have two other buttons apart from this, right? That when they click, if it's yes, then instead of you calling where is that, instead of you doing this here now, right, you're now going to perform this action within that particular method, but you can call all that here and pass whatever status you have here as an argument to the method that performs that particular action. Any other question? So right now, let me see, I think we are missing just one more thing, right? So when you're using Hive, you need to set remember future builder, right? In this case, this future builder is expecting to build a future, right? So now our future is going to be stated here. I don't know what's wrong with my alignment coming. Still not done properly, so we're not going to say Hive. So we now open a box and we just call this tasks. So I think the only thing left now here is what we are returning in this case within when our snapshot has a piece of data, right? So let me get our method name to-do list. So this is what we intend to return, right? So let me see this here. So all this is just telling me to set it as constant. So assuming everything is done, it's correct because we've not been testing, right? So let's run and rebuild our app. So currently we don't have anything showing coming. So let's test it and see if there's an issue. So Flutter Friday. So we have our item listed, right? So this is what I'm talking about. So even if you accidentally check it, right, it's going to uncheck because of this condition that we have here, right? Because of what we have here. So if you click it, it just checks. So let's try another one. Workout and legs. So we have that, right? So we have everything tied together now. So let me just walk us through the summary of everything that we've done, because I understand that it can be a lot, and today I'm not in like my most active mode because of painkillers. But remember what we did, right? In the beginning, we started with our pub spec YAML. I'm not going to talk about like the page introduction page thing that we added, right? Because I believe that one is very, very easy to understand, or you can just watch that video. But the core thing here now is for us to use Hive, right? We have to import Hive and Hive Flutter. So this is Hive core. So if you're writing Dart on its own, right, Dart programming language, you may just have to use Hive. But since we're using Flutter, we need the core libraries within Hive, and we need Hive Flutter as well. Then for our dev dependencies, we needed to add Hive generator and build runner, right? Then once we did that, let me see, did we add any other? Okay, all these were tied to the initial tutorial. So when we did that, we now created a task model. Now remember, object-oriented programming, right? Objects are models of classes, right, or instances of classes. We are building our program around. So now this class now is the template of the model we are trying to build our class around, and the object itself is a to-do item, right? So that's why we have this task class. So the properties now of our object were to do. We needed a date, time when the to-do was created, and the status of the to-do, if it's done or not. Then we had this constructor. So this constructor is where we pass in the values of our to-do. So if you see where we are adding the to-do here, right? Where is the here, right? So we're calling this constructor, and we're setting the values. So we're saying the to-do value is content, timestamp is right now, done, status is false, right? So that's basically this, right? And we created a to map function which converts whatever we are storing into the database into maps, because Hive is a NoSQL database that uses a key value pair, which is basically a map, or in Python a dictionary. So when we are inserting, you notice we have to call this box.add, and we are adding the task after we convert it to a map, right? So we convert it to a map, and we now add that, right? Then when we are done with adding it, we can now pop the UI. So if I say wash dishes now, right? So we are getting this wash dishes now as our content, which is the content. Then the current date when you hit the enter, right? Or on my own keyboard, or on the touchscreen keyboard, then we are automatically setting this to false. But this is not inserted in this form. We now have to convert it to a map. So that's why we have this to map function here. So once we do that and I hit enter, it's now added to the database, right? So once we add to the database, we are now doing set state. So once you call set state, automatically it refreshes, it rebuilds the UI. If you remember what set state does, it rebuilds the UI, adding the current item to the database. We also have the unchanged that updates the content that the user is typing as they continue typing it, right? So that's what this our show dialog does, and these first two methods of that task class does. So to display our list here, we have a future builder. So a future basically is an asynchronous process, right, that returns a future value. So you may have a long running task like accessing a database, storing stuff to databases and so on, right? That may take very, very long. You don't want them to run synchronously. You don't want them to run on the main thread so that your app does not freeze, right? So what you have to do now is to what they call it is to make it run asynchronously, which is what Future does. Not Future the rapper this time, but you understand what I'm saying. So in this case now, the Future has a required parameter, which is a builder, and this is going to build whatever we wish to return in our from our Future, right? And it's going to return it asynchronously. So we have this asynchronous snapshot. So we're now going to check, okay, this our Future, does it have a data? If it has a data, we now get that particular data and assign it to our box, which is where we are storing it. I'm going to ignore this right now, right? Then we now return this list. Then else, if we don't have anything, we now return that loading or progress indicator. So it just keeps loading as if it's trying to find something, but right now it's basically not doing anything till you add an item. That's why we had that till after we built everything, and it was no longer empty. So now whenever we have a data, we now want to return this list that we have here, right? We now want to return this list that we have here. So what I did was, or what we did was to create a method that returns a widget, and that widget is called the list view builder. So the list view builder now accepts a couple of arguments, which is the item count. So the item count is how many items am I going to draw here, right? So we're now telling it, okay, get the length of the number of tasks we have in the database and create and draw a number of tiles matching that particular size, right? So that's why we're now saying task.length. So if we have 4 items in our list, then the list builder is going to draw the 4th item, 5th, 6th, and so on. So now within the item builder, we are now passing in its own current context and this index. So this index is the current position of each item. So this is index 0, index 1, 2, and so on, right? Just like any other list. So now we are going to use the last method within our model, which is our from map factory method. So I'm now saying, okay, we're now creating a variable called task, and we're now getting the current task at a current index. So we're starting from, let's say, 0, 1, 2, 3. So from 0, we get the current task, convert it from map, then we return it as a task object. So I return it as a task object here. So once we have that, now we store that in the variable task. Then we can now call all these properties of the object. Say task.todo. This is now going to give us our to do. Task.timestamp. So this is going to give us our timestamp. But since the timestamp itself is not a string, we now have to convert it to a string. So I'm going to get to this later. So within our list view, we are now returning a list tile, right? We're now returning a list tile. So this list tile now is just basically an item within a list. So this is one item now. So it has a couple of properties, but we just use 3. So we use title, right? So the title is what you have here. That's a bit bigger, right? So because we are setting it as title, it looks a bit different, right? It's a bit bigger than the subtitle. So we have our timestamp now represented as subtitle. We didn't format the time. You guys can format the time. It would be nice to see you guys try that, to format this time to give you maybe like the day, or you can say Tuesday or Saturday, or it can be 11/03/2023 without the hour and the all the way to the millisecond, right? So you can always format that. Then it has this called trailing. Just like it has trailing, it has leading. So trailing is at the end, leading is going to be at the beginning. So once you have this, now we're now saying, okay, If the task is done, return a green checkbox outlined icon. Then else, if it's not done, we now return the blank one, which is what these ones have. So if we click this now, automatically it turns green. If we unclick it, it goes back to how it was. So the list style has a couple of actions, right, or event based actions like on tap, long press, on focus, and so on. So we use the on tap and the long press. So like Praise said, if you like, you can warn people when they are marking something else to do, right? So when they click the to do, you can now show another dialog to say, do you want to do this? If they click yes, then you can now perform this action within that particular dialog, right? So well, in this case, we are just flipping. We are just flipping the current value of the done property. So I'm saying get task.done. So this can be true or it can be false, right? Whatever it is, change it to the other one. So if this task.done now returns false, not false is going to be true, right? If it's false, not false, if it's true, not true is going to be false. So it's going to keep. So that's why it keeps flipping it, right? Then once we do that, we set state, because if we don't set state, if you click it, nothing is going to, it's not going to rebuild the widget. So that's why we have to set state. Similarly, if we do this, right, long press is gone. So for me, this is where you are supposed to actually add that check, right? This is the proper place, so that you don't just long press and it just goes like that, because your finger may just rest on it. But so far, this is just basically the to-do app, and I just felt like we could finish it today and see what you guys can come up with subsequently. So now, if I'm going to give you guys any task, right, to do after this, right, maybe this. So when they skip, right, there is something called shared preferences, right, which means you can, with shared preferences, you can save the current settings of your user's application. So if they click this now, you can use shared preferences to say, okay, they viewed this already before, then your application skips this entire process. So automatically they just land here in the daily planner homepage without going through the whole introduction cycle over and over again. So you guys have any question? I just decided to do that long recap because a lot of people joined in late. So, but we're already done with this project. I'm just waiting for you guys to have for your questions.